Lovely, Marios. Welcome to Reese. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm good. Just back from a few trips.
Yeah, tell me about your travels.
After the show, usually I tend to go back home for a bit and have a very small break. But this time we decided to do a road show. Went to Kiev and we're going later on to LA. Had a really nice weekend in Salzburg.
So nice. I'm jealous.
Back to cold London.
I know, it's so horrible. But it's interesting because you mentioned travel, because you've talked about this in the past when you were talking about your work. You know, this idea of being kind of quite international focused and very cultured is really important to your work. And that came through this season, I thought, with, you know, the fact that you worked with incredible Turkish artists and you kind of embrace different cultures and different inspirations. Is that something that's always quite important to you?
Tunisian artist.
Tunisian, sorry.
No worries. Well, no, I'm not choosing carefully to be like cultured, or it's just I tend to probably start with a word or something that maybe has not a direct connection with fashion, but I sort of maybe force it, or accidentally it is then later connected with something that is more fashion conscious. So this season, probably the collection started pretty much by looking dark romanticism. I was looking at ghosts first, and the element about ghostly elements, layers, sounds that kind of portray, you know, sort of like a hint of ghost. And then later on I looked at the movie Nosferatu, and I remember Isabella Gianni just was so beautiful, and you know, I guess like Isabella Gianni, and from other movies when I was younger, she had a lasting impression. She had such a sort of like porcelain face, and you know, then you know you come across a theme, and it all kind of accidentally comes together. It's very interesting. It's very organic, and by the end of it, when you put everything on a board, it sort of makes sense.
So will it be an idea that comes to you when you're starting a collection? It won't be a particular image, or it'll be something more sort of tangential like that, and then that'll sort of, how would you start? Would you then start sort of pulling together reference images, or will you start thinking about silhouettes?
It's more of a mood, I think. Also, the way I brought up in terms of fashion, it was very much looking at photography. You know, was back then probably a 13-year-old boy, looking mostly at collectives of photographers, and there was a particular magazine called Photo. It was the French edition that I used to look in the 90s, and I guess lots of the work that comes from Mario Schwab is very much about emotions and sort of linking them with the actual craftsmanship of you know, in fashion terms. So the words that usually come up this time was calligrams, and they were very much connected to love letters, but also sort of like an artistry that we are not necessarily, as a generation, we don't really, there is no continuation in that sense of embracing it. Like I kind of started thinking, oh wow, how incredible it was when we were receiving letters, or even, you know, teenage love letters, and then you think like all this frantic madness of texting and emailing, we lost the context of actually leaving traces, or like being tactile about communication. And in a sense, this develops then into a collection. That's how I start. I guess I regard it as an emotional sort of background, how I tend to, how is the starting point, and then it develops more into a fashion sort of directed theme. And I remember contacting a Tunisian artist after Christmas.
Oh wow, that's so funny. You shouldn't own up to that.
No, well, you know, some elements in the collection come pretty late.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about it. You know, that's the way of...
The pace is so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I was looking through, you know, calligraphy, I thought I wouldn't like necessarily for it to have a meaning in, you know, for it to be words necessarily, but more the directional or a freehand sort of evolution of how you can be inspired by letters and by the alphabet. And I contacted this Tunisian artist. He lives in Tunisia. I got to know his work, I think, through a friend living in Paris, and he said, "Oh wow, this guy is really great. You should collaborate with him." That happened 2 years ago, 3 years. And after Christmas, suddenly I remembered him. So I was like, okay, give it a go. It's probably not gonna work. And you know, it was a lengthy process. We ended up having to travel to Tunisia last minute because there wasn't sadly any parcels that would, you know, arrive there on time. So we sent somebody from our studio. So it was quite a nice story overall.
That's lovely, yeah. I want to try and pronounce his name, but I'm really scared.
Anja Mardawi.
Yeah, I'll let you say it, not me. I wouldn't even be able to do that. But I want to look at the collection because we'll see some of those pieces there. But just before we have a look, I want to go back to sort of one word that you mentioned then when you're talking about, you know, how you start with a mood. And you said the word tactile, which I think is a really interesting thing that runs through all your work, because people always talk about, you know, how you work with the body and how this idea of form. And I think that kind of element of something being, you know, tactile and touchable was something that for me really stood out this season, and there was something that was so sort of sensual about the clothes and really, yeah, it was just something incredibly romantic. Is that very important to you, that idea of kind of...
I'm not regarded usually as a romantic person, but I guess I have quite a romantic side, yeah. There is this element of tactileness within my work because I like the aspect of something not being entirely perfect, and usually this comes from seeing the hand on a garment or seeing the labor on a garment, and I think it's beautiful. You know, I regard myself as a workman, not necessarily always as a designer. I like the craft, I like the sound of craft, and it's something very humble about it that is very attractive to me. This season it started by the invite, which was
heat sensitive.
Heat sensitive, and I wanted to include it because I have done that on Spring Summer 2008, where the fabrics were changing colors due to the heat of the body, and I wanted to bring it back because it meant there is a vanishing of this sort of artistry of script writing and, you know, generally like love letters and stuff like that. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of surprise the invitee, the attendant, to, you know, to leave his trace on the invite. But also the garments, they have a tendency to show maybe a technique that is usually done by hand, or it's a fabric that sometimes it's manipulated, and you can see the trace of, you know, the craftsmanship. And I generally find clothes that are mass-produced a bit clinical, and there's something nice about it, and quite brushed and sort of very polished. But then you lose the sort of relevance of, if I may say so, like the old school sort of learning curves that I had in Salzburg and in Austria, where you would really see the craft on a garment. It's almost like looking at a really old, Madame Grey dress, and you are surprised that, oh my God, it has so many, stitches that you can see, and you're surprised because you think like it would be perfection, but it is perfect, but it just, you can still see the intense workmanship.
And that's akin to what you were talking about with this idea of things like writing letters. It's putting a bit more sort of heart and a bit more soul and a bit more effort into something. You know, if you see a letter, there's that idea that someone sort of toiled and worked over it. I think that's that really struck me about the collection, that idea of kind of, you know, workmanship and craft. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it was interesting because, as I said, we didn't have much time, and the idea was to send the patterns to somebody that never or didn't have like maybe a fashion background, and he had to actually take the canvas, which is the dress, and actually paint freehand on it. The only direction that I gave was topographies, anatomical topographies of the body, which I thought were very much connected to his work, because they are the finer brush strokes or the more bolder ones, and they always reminded me of the pelvis, or you know, symmetrical elements that you find in the body, but they are not always perfect symmetrical.
Yeah.
So so it was an interesting collaboration in the sense that also people see it as, oh, it's Arabic, you know, what does it mean, you know, and
did you get lots of confused journalists leaving the show trying to work out what it all said?
Well, still lots of people. I like this element of hide and reveal, and sometimes never giving the full complete angle within the garment, or you know, I guess I was a very noisy child. I always looked at opening people's boxes, you know, treasures, and you know, going to a house and, you know, being shown the, you know, little things that you keep in treasure, you know, little treasures or collectible items. And I think this fascination about, you know, cutting a garment and showing the inside is also quite romantic, you know. It's almost like everything that goes within a garment is not relevant, and I've been taught, you know, when I was little, that you need to pay as much attention on the inside of the garment than the outside, and you know, it was quite a probably very how do you say, stuck up thought, you know. Who needs the inside, but you know, that became a theme almost in certain collections.
Yeah, for sure. Should we have a look at this collection?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's look at if I can work my computer.
I hope I don't talk too much.
No, you don't. It's fascinating. So this is what we were just talking about then with the
beginning of the collection is concentrating on you know, metal pieces that had the antique mirror effect.
Yeah.
You know, that later on becomes like gowns, shattered antique mirrors, and I wanted to bring back this quite classic metal piece element that started off with Schwab like in 2006, and make it more organic and actually being embedded in lace, so it becomes part of the lace island, as we call it. And again, those pieces are pointing out a certain symmetry in the beginning of the show, leading towards then the still very organic, like calligrams.
I was interested in this sort of the interplay between the short and the long that you did. I thought that was really striking.
The beginning of the show, and generally the whole collection, was mixing the element of short and long, because I really wanted to go back to long silhouette. There's something quite beautiful when you combine the two together, whether it is the border lines that later on continue in the dress, that you have a choker, then you have a, you know, a bust point, and then a mini, and then again long border on the hem. So there was a continuous sort of sectioning and framing of skin. So you have like the long skirts with the shorter sort of minis that are becoming one, and so the capes and the short mini dresses were probably an introduction to this idea of like short and long should coexist, and then being framed also with the shoes that start exactly where the hemline of the capes are. Also quite a lot of sort of slit sectioning where you can have a glimpse of skin, or
Yeah, that glimpse of skin that you mentioned, that was something that I thought was great in this collection, because it's never that kind of obvious like sort of sexy items, but there was that, I like how you sort of play with that in what you do, it's just that little bit of flesh, it's a little sort of hint at it. I thought that was interesting with this. Can we talk about some of the fabrics, like the PVC, because you embroidered on PVC, that was amazing.
The PVC, we wanted to work on a material, unusual material on guipure lace and generally embroidery. So we looked at the people that we've been working for a long time in Switzerland and Austria, and we sent a few samples. It was quite tricky because, as you can imagine, PVC is bouncing back the needles, is keeping the needles from embroidering. So it took quite a lot of testing. And again, like the embroideries that went onto these pieces were a combination of very floral but also hidden letters that you don't instantly see. There is a few stuff beginning to go into the calligram, so there is a definite pace of the process from the capes at the beginning, which frame the short and the long, but then also go to the the more glassy elements, like the PVC should give a shine against the embroidery that was more matte, and at the same time the embroidery was quite bulbous. It was quite 3D, kind of giving the impression of inking or writing on paper.
I love those hidden letters. I didn't know that. That's so romantic. That's lovely.
Yeah, it's then combined with the capes again and the little shirtings underneath. So the patent and the slits here continue in sections of like elbows, giving hints of joints of anatomy. I like this element. I always return back to this and Verselius sort of anatomist that was very much like a story that from spring summer 08 I carried through. The calligrams again, like they are quite anatomical. You can see that they move around like bone structures, and I not necessarily directed him to do the brush strokes in specific points of the body, but he knew exactly what I wanted because I showed him previous work, and I remember like looking at this framework or like window framing from not Notre Dame but churches in France that had sectioning of glass, and these bold black outlines are only black is used in the collection only to frame and only to portray the calligram. So it was quite nice to later on introduce it in more graphic detailing.
Ways, yeah, for sure. You regularly sort of draw on the art world. Is it quite refreshing to work with someone who sits outside of fashion?
Yeah, because it's first of all, like it's a constant development, and I really love the challenge of like learning through what I do, and to bring somebody that is a complete outsider in fashion. Sometimes they don't really say yes because they are a bit snobbish about the subject. But I think the interaction with artists and whether it is a designer that for jewelry or it's quite interesting because they bring a completely different element, and you are being kept challenged because you need to learn how they work, and
I guess that dialogue, it takes you outside your comfort zone a bit as well when you have to get out of the
it's really lovely. I like I regard that as one of the best parts in my work, bringing outsiders into my world and stepping into their world. It's great. So later on, this element of calligrams were portrayed in this dress now that is coming, almost like it is a logo, like you have in Nike or like certain brandings. And I like the idea of like having this modernity with something that is so old,
old and so traditional.
Again, like a very body conscious dress with the slits. Like the slits were going back to the medieval element.
There was something quite regal about this. I thought,
Yeah, no, it was definitely like all this portraiture that you find in Flemish painters.
You looked at Petrus Christus, didn't you?
Petrus Christus, like the portrait of a young lady or a woman, was quite an inspiration, because I always look at these paintings, especially when you go to, to Vienna, to the gallery, and you see this very avant-garde sort of fashion of, and the graphicness of the portraits are fascinating. You have them being normally, how do you call it, from the side?
Like a portrait.
A portrait, yeah. Almost like a silhouette.
Yeah, a silhouette.
And they have very graphic sort of outlines. The contrast between dark colors and the paleness of the skin is quite futuristic as well.
I like that you're championing pale people. That's really good for me, because I'm really, really pale.
Yeah, that we kind of try to emphasize on colors that are also contradictory. Very dark tones going into oxbloods and lipstick colors that were very close to black, but then never black, except to accentuate. Again, like these mirror pieces, like the metal pieces that were antique finish, they were put on lace, against the lace that is more fragile.
People talked about the whole season as, they said that it was very cinematic, and that was one thing that I think was really stood out, because people talked about what Marc Jacobs did, and that sense of theatre and cinema. But I think that was something that struck me about this collection, is it felt very opulent, but not in a kind of shouty way, just in this very sort of beautiful theatrical way. Is that something
that comes usually by how I work music, and for a show it's very, very important. And also the music needs to interact with whoever is looking at the show in a way that he feels like an outside from everyone that is next to him. I don't like the grouping of fashion, we all sit and watch a fashion show. I like for it to become
personal,
a bit more personal. I tend to use musical pieces that bring emotions, and we started with, the 3 last season being very cinematographic in the way we bring music together, and they remind you of certain movies or certain classics, and the show needs to be cinematographic, not in a heavy way, but that the girls feel quite natural in their environment, and they don't necessarily do the classic catwalk.
Yeah, you want that.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
that does,
I like for you to be with the music and the girl that wears the beautiful garment, and this is the interaction of the viewer. Ancient Greek Santos, again, this is the second time we collaborated. And
it's beautiful.
The metal pieces again were very much like cat silhouettes of the Anja Mahdawi's work, positioned in, again, like under the cups or and in the hips.
And we've seen there was a piece earlier that we've seen, because some of these pieces have been on the red carpet already and they've been worn and they look so beautiful. There's one that I think was Blake Lively that wore it, and it looked just so beautiful. Because I'm interested, because people, I'm going to pause this now because I don't want to miss some of these amazing dresses, but I want to ask you something, because people talk about you sometimes, which is I think a bit simplistic, but they say that you're kind of a red carpet designer, but it got me thinking about how you approach femininity and designing for women, and whether you think about it as about designing for occasion, or whether you think about it as designing for sort of a type of woman. And I was quite interested in that, because you do get that tag quite a lot.
Yeah, well, red carpet, I wasn't necessarily the most red carpet person in the past, I guess. I try to be like more understated in the way I portray what I do, and I think red carpet came accidentally, and as they do, like those things, and one actress is wearing the garment and the other one sees it, etc., etc. My agency is doing a great job for that, so
you can't complain.
I can't complain. But also, I think there is an element in Mara Schwab that is hard-edged femininity,
For sure,
and I I guess I need to accept that this young starlets, or all these great actresses are the new generation. You know, they are strong-minded. Some of them, which I prefer, use the dresses themselves. They don't necessarily go always through a stylist. But you pointed out something else before, which is quite important. I don't necessarily like to design for occasion where I think it happens to be that way, There is an element of dressing up is vanishing as well, the way you used to dress up, even in different centuries, you would take your time. Yeah. There is something beautiful about it, that making an effort, making the, So doing an effort also to maybe like inform the body with a still simple silhouette, but the detail is within it. It's probably my obsession. I don't exaggerate necessarily. I don't do anything extreme to change the silhouette. It is quite simplified,
simple,
but I think the detail, the 3D detail that goes within the garment, or the way it portrays the skin, is probably very Mara Schwab. It's like the one that is the obsession.
I've got too much to ask you. I keep having to stop.
No, it's fine. So here again, like one of the off-shoulder dresses, the choker, which frames this dramatic sort of cut, but also the slits for the sleeve.
And this is that simplicity thing that we just talked about as well, because that's what I thought was so stunning about this look and this look here is it's so simple in a sense, but also there's something so regal and opulent about it, but in a very quiet way.
It's very graphic, probably. That's why you don't need necessarily further information. And also it's the way the cut sort of brings short and long, and certain elements that, I regard as very graphic, because you have like a glimpse of sparkle, which...
The Swarovski.
Yeah, which is a product that I like using quite a lot, because I like to modernize it. It is a very traditional product, but then again, bring it in a graphic sense through a dress, or, portraying, highlighting, it's almost like a crystal fissure. You see something that is very natural, a natural formation, and then you have a breakthrough, and you see a crystallized world. I think, again, this is something quite romantic in a sense, when you find something that is not necessarily very, it's just something you can throw, but inside what goes within, it's very special.
Very special. No, actually, that's lovely, yeah.
So, again, the veiling that is, I love the aspect of bringing something matte on top of shine, because it makes it less typical, right?
Yeah, it's new, isn't it?
These dresses were inspired by, antique mirrors, and because they have something ghostly about it. I started thinking, when I was doing the ghosts, what gives you an element of, this fading, ghostly effect, and antique mirrors, this hint of,
something
this
a bit sinister,
texture.
but
it is quite sinister, and I looked at, beautiful 60s mirrors when they have this faceting at the end of it, which is like a little flower with a brass hinge, or like a bolt, and this is how they were also embedded onto the fabric. Close up, they are much more special, like when you see the craftsmanship that goes within it. These dresses, again, like should create this very dramatic droplet, almost like as if the hardware is pulling the dress down, bringing a sort of very organic neckline. Sometimes nice to combine jewelry together with becoming one piece with the dress.
This is the ghost. I think the ghost thing comes through so well with that. It's just so mystical in a sense.
It's this dark grey color as well.
Yeah. It's very smoky,
Yeah, it had quite a sound when it was walking
down.
down.
I was gonna say, I can imagine. Beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
Oh, so you happy
you
from after this season? You pleased? What are you up to now? You've had a well-deserved slight break, haven't you?
Yeah, and we're traveling with the collection, as I said in the beginning, so it's great. We're going to LA, which is going to be exciting too. Normally we see a lot of stylists and editors, and it's great to bring the collection in different parts of the world.
That's kind of what you're about as well, isn't it?
I like the interaction of fashion, and probably that's another thing that I'm really interested in, like that you can channel it nowadays in so many different ways and through social media and
different outlets. I want to pause it before we get to you because I think that will be a bit meta. But well, thank you very much.
Thank you as well for inviting me.
That was lovely. I feel like I learned a lot.